Go before me, Lord. The best morning prayers to bless your day. This morning, before the sun fully rose, before the noise of the world began to speak, God was already present. Before your steps touched the ground, heaven had already gone ahead of you. Today, we are not just praying out of habit. We are praying with intention. We are declaring that we will not move without God moving first. We are acknowledging that our strength is not enough, our wisdom is not enough, and our plans are incomplete unless the Lord goes before us. This morning prayer is a divine invitation for God to prepare the way, to remove unseen obstacles, to align every encounter, and to order our steps with purpose and peace. When the Lord goes before you, confusion cannot lead you. When the Lord goes before you, fear cannot control you. When the Lord goes before you, the day must respond in your favor. So today, as we begin, we surrender the hours ahead. We place our decisions, our conversations, our work, and our hearts before God and boldly say, "Go before me, Lord, prepare what I cannot see, open what I cannot open, and bless this day with your presence." Let us pray. Not from desperation, but from authority, not from fear, but from faith, not behind the day, but ahead of it. When we speak of divine direction before action, we are acknowledging a spiritual order that governs a victorious life. Nothing of lasting value begins with movement, it begins with alignment. Before the feet move, the heart must submit. Before decisions are made, authority must be transferred from human impulse to divine wisdom. Too often people rush into days led by urgency rather than obedience, by pressure rather than prayer, by fear rather than faith. But when God is invited to go before us, the day is no longer reactive, it becomes intentional. We stop responding to circumstances and begin walking in purpose. Divine direction is not about speed, it is about accuracy. It is not about doing more, it is about doing what heaven has already approved. Every morning presents choices before it presents outcomes. The mistake many make is assuming that clarity comes after action, when in truth, clarity is established before action. God does not bless movement that bypasses him. He blesses obedience that flows from surrender. When divine direction leads, confusion loses its voice. The anxiety that comes from guessing, striving, and overthinking is replaced with a quiet confidence that says, "I am where I am supposed to be." Divine direction removes the burden of self-navigation. It allows the believer to walk without constantly questioning every step, every conversation, every turn, because the direction was settled in prayer before the day unfolded. There are paths that look productive but lead to exhaustion, opportunities that appear profitable but cost peace, and doors that open quickly but close violently. Divine direction discerns what looks good from what is God. Not everything available is a sign. Not everything permissible is beneficial. When the Lord goes before us, he filters what we see. He sharpens discernment so that we are not impressed by appearance or intimidated by pressure. We learn to recognize when something is simply an option and when it is an instruction. This is why prayer before action is not optional, it is protective. It guards against misalignment that can take years to recover from. Divine direction also establishes order. Chaos thrives where leadership is absent. When God is not consulted first, emotions take the lead, and emotions are unstable guides. Feelings change with circumstances, but divine instruction remains constant. When God goes before us, he brings structure to our decisions. He orders our steps, not randomly, but strategically. He positions us in rooms we did not know we needed to enter and keeps us from places we were never meant to survive. Many dangers are avoided not because we were strong, but because we were redirected. Many failures never happened, not because we were wise, but because God intervened before action took place. There is a difference between asking God to bless what we are about to do and asking God to tell us what to do. One seeks approval, the other seeks instruction. Divine direction before action requires humility. It requires admitting that our perspective is limited and that our understanding is incomplete. Pride rushes ahead and asks God to catch up. Faith waits and asks God to lead. This waiting is not passive, it is powerful. It is the discipline of stillness in a world addicted to motion. It is the strength to pause when everyone else is running. It is the courage to trust that obedience will produce more than effort ever could. When God goes before us, timing becomes as important as direction. Some things fail not because they were wrong, but because they were premature. Divine direction aligns not only what we do, but when we do it. It teaches restraint in moments of excitement and boldness in moments of fear. It trains the spirit to recognize seasons. There are doors that should not be knocked on yet, battles that should not be fought now, and conversations that should be delayed until heaven signals release. Acting too soon can be as damaging as acting too late. Divine direction keeps us synchronized with heaven's calendar. Divine direction before action also brings peace, not because the path is easy, but because the presence of God removes the need to control outcomes. When we know God has gone ahead, we stop obsessing over results. We trust that what awaits us has already been addressed. This peace does not mean the absence of challenge. It means the absence of panic. We may still face resistance, but we face it with assurance rather than anxiety. We may still encounter obstacles, but we encounter them knowing they were anticipated. The confidence that comes from divine direction is not loud, but it is unshakable. Living this way requires daily surrender. Yesterday's direction does not automatically cover today's decisions. Dependence on God is not a one-time event, it is a posture. Each morning we choose again who leads. We choose whether our schedule dictates our spirit or our spirit dictates our schedule. Divine direction before action means the day begins with God, not as an afterthought, but as the foundation. It means we refuse to let urgency replace intimacy. It means we understand that prayer is not stealing time from productivity, it is securing productivity. When God goes before us, He also prepares hearts. Conversations become easier, not because people change, but because God has already worked ahead of us. Resistance softens, favor increases, doors open with less force. Divine direction creates alignment not only in us, but around us. It orchestrates connections, delays interruptions, and rearranges circumstances. What would have required struggle now flows with grace. What would have demanded explanation now receives understanding. This is the unseen advantage of letting God lead first. Divine direction does not eliminate responsibility, it enhances it. We still must act, decide, speak, and move, but we do so under guidance rather than pressure. Obedience becomes lighter than self-effort. The weight of performance is replaced with the joy of partnership. We stop striving to make things happen and begin cooperating with what God has already set in motion. The question shifts from "what should I do?" to "where is God already moving?" And in following that movement, we discover that the safest place to be is not where we feel most capable, but where God is most present. This way of living trains the heart to trust beyond logic. There will be moments when divine direction contradicts human reasoning, when obedience does not make sense on paper, when faith requires release rather than grasping. In those moments, the discipline of seeking God before action becomes critical. It reminds us that success defined by heaven may look different from success defined by the world. It teaches us to value obedience over outcome, alignment over applause, faithfulness over speed. And in that place of surrender where God consistently goes before us, we begin to experience days that are not driven by pressure, not ruled by fear, not controlled by circumstances, but guided by the quiet, steady confidence that we are walking in a path already prepared, already protected, already aligned, already authorized, already covered, already ordered, already secured by the one who sees the end from the beginning and moves ahead of those who trust Him enough to wait before they move. When God's presence secures the day, the foundation of everything that follows is no longer fragile. The day is not held together by strength, planning, or discipline alone, but by the nearness of God that surrounds, fills, and governs every moment. Many people wake up already bracing themselves, anticipating resistance, expecting pressure, preparing for disappointment. But when God's presence is acknowledged at the beginning, the atmosphere of the day shifts before circumstances even appear. Presence does not wait for problems to show up. It establishes authority before they arrive. The presence of God is not a feeling reserved for worship moments. It is a covering that determines how the day unfolds. Where God is present, fear loses its power to dominate thoughts. Anxiety may attempt to speak, but it does not have the final word. God's presence stabilizes the inner world before the outer world makes its demands. Instead of being emotionally reactive, the heart becomes spiritually anchored. The believer is no longer tossed between moods, opinions, and pressures because the presence of God acts as an internal governor, keeping the soul aligned even when the environment is unstable. When God's presence secures the day, identity becomes settled early. Many struggles arise from forgetting who we are once the day begins. Responsibilities, expectations, and comparisons attempt to redefine worth. But when the presence of God is prioritized, identity is affirmed before performance is required. We are reminded that value does not come from productivity, but from relationship. This awareness prevents burnout because the day is no longer an attempt to prove significance. Work becomes an expression of obedience rather than a pursuit of validation. The presence of God guards the heart from measuring itself against unrealistic standards. God's presence also sharpens awareness. It heightens sensitivity to what is happening beneath the surface. We begin to notice shifts in atmosphere, changes in tone, and unspoken tensions. This discernment is not suspicion, it is spiritual perception. When God is present, we are less likely to misinterpret situations or respond incorrectly. We speak with wisdom rather than impulse. We listen more carefully. We pause before reacting. Presence slows us down just enough to respond from truth instead of emotion. Many conflicts escalate simply because God's presence was not acknowledged in the moment. When the presence of God secures the day, protection becomes more than physical safety. It becomes spiritual preservation. Not every threat is visible. Some dangers come through thoughts, words, distractions, and subtle compromises. God's presence creates boundaries around the mind. It filters what is allowed to linger. Temptations may present themselves, but they lose their appeal when the awareness of God is strong. The presence of God does not remove choice, it strengthens resolve. It reminds the heart that certain things are beneath the dignity of a life submitted to God. There is also a confidence that emerges when God's presence is prioritized. This confidence is not arrogance, it is assurance. We are not intimidated by the size of the task or the authority of others because we know who is with us. The presence of God redefines power. We realize that we do not need to dominate environments to influence them. Quiet obedience carries more weight than loud ambition. Where God's presence rests, favor operates without striving. Doors open without manipulation. Opportunities align without excessive effort. The day unfolds with less resistance because heaven is involved. God's presence secures emotional balance. It does not eliminate emotion, but it prevents emotion from becoming the leader. Joy is no longer dependent on circumstances. Peace is not fragile. Even disappointment is processed differently. When God is present, we grieve without despair, confront without bitterness, and endure without losing hope. The presence of God acts as a stabilizing force that keeps the heart from extremes. We are not easily shaken by praise, nor are we crushed by criticism. The inner life remains steady because it is anchored in something eternal. When God's presence secures the day, productivity takes on a different quality. The goal is no longer to do as much as possible, but to do what matters most. Presence brings focus. It exposes distractions that masquerade as urgency. We become more aware of what deserves our energy and what is simply noise. Time is stewarded more wisely because the heart is not scattered. The presence of God reduces unnecessary busyness and increases meaningful progress. Tasks are completed with clarity rather than chaos. Even rest becomes purposeful, not guilt-driven. The presence of God also changes how we experience opposition. Challenges no longer feel like personal attacks or signs of failure. They are understood as part of a larger process. When God is present, we interpret resistance differently. Instead of asking why something is hard, we ask what God is forming in us through it. This perspective keeps the heart from becoming bitter. It allows perseverance to grow without resentment. The presence of God reframes hardship as refinement rather than punishment. When the day is secured by God's presence, relationships are handled with greater grace. We are less defensive and more compassionate. We do not feel the need to win every argument or prove every point. The presence of God softens speech and strengthens patience. It allows us to respond with kindness without compromising truth. We become aware that how we speak matters as much as what we say. God's presence influences tone, timing, and intent. This often diffuses tension before it escalates. God's presence also brings accountability. When we are aware of Him, we are less likely to justify harmful behaviors or overlook small compromises. Presence keeps the conscience sensitive. It reminds us that integrity matters even when no one is watching. This awareness is not oppressive, it is freeing. It protects us from choices that would cost more than they promise. The presence of God does not restrict life, it preserves it. When God's presence secures the day, we become more resilient. Unexpected changes do not derail us. Delays do not destroy our peace. Interruptions are handled without frustration. We understand that God is not limited to our plans. His presence assures us that even disruptions can be used for good. Flexibility increases because trust is deeper. We are not clinging tightly to outcomes. We are walking closely with God. Living with this awareness requires intentionality. God's presence must be welcomed, not assumed. It must be honored, not ignored. When we begin the day acknowledging Him, we invite His involvement in every detail. This invitation transforms ordinary moments into sacred ones. Routine becomes meaningful. Simple tasks carry eternal weight. The day is no longer divided into spiritual and secular segments. Everything becomes an act of worship when done in His presence. When God's presence secures the day, the soul experiences rest even in motion. There is a quiet assurance beneath the activity. The heart is not racing ahead of the body. The mind is not overwhelmed by what might go wrong. We move with a sense of companionship, knowing we are not navigating the day alone. This awareness changes how we walk, how we speak, how we decide, how we endure. The presence of God becomes the environment in which the entire day exists, shaping reactions, guiding decisions, guarding the heart, strengthening resolve, refining character, increasing discernment, sustaining peace, deepening trust, and anchoring every moment in the assurance that we are not facing anything unsupported, unseen, or unmanaged by the God who remains present from the first breath of the morning through every unfolding moment that follows. Faith that declares God goes ahead is not passive belief. It is an active posture of the Spirit that speaks before evidence appears and trusts before outcomes are visible. This kind of faith understands that words are not merely sounds, but spiritual instruments that align the present with what God has already arranged in the unseen. Declaring that God goes ahead is not wishful thinking, it is agreement with divine authority. It is the decision to let confession lead experience rather than allowing circumstances to dictate expectation. Faith speaks first because it knows that what is spoken in alignment with God establishes the environment the day must operate in. When faith declares that God goes ahead, it removes the burden of self-sufficiency. The heart no longer feels responsible for controlling every detail, predicting every risk, or managing every outcome. Instead, trust replaces tension. This declaration is an act of surrender, acknowledging that God's wisdom surpasses human planning and that His foresight covers what we cannot anticipate. It is a refusal to begin the day from a position of fear or insecurity. Faith announces that the path has already been addressed, that the unknown has already been seen, and that the future is not as uncertain as it appears. This kind of faith reshapes how we approach challenges. Instead of asking whether we are capable, we ask whether God has already gone ahead. Ability becomes secondary to obedience. Courage is no longer rooted in confidence in self, but in confidence in God's presence before us. Faith that declares God goes ahead understands that strength is not found in preparedness alone, but in positioning. When God is in front, even limited resources become sufficient. What seems inadequate is multiplied because it is connected to divine provision rather than human calculation. Declaring that God goes ahead also establishes spiritual authority. It sets the tone for the day by announcing who leads and who follows. Faith does not wait for resistance to arise before asserting truth. It speaks while things are still quiet. It declares peace before conflict, favor before opposition, clarity before confusion. These declarations are not attempts to control God, but acknowledgments of His sovereignty. Faith aligns speech with heaven's perspective, refusing to magnify potential problems over divine power. Faith that declares God goes ahead is discipline. It does not speak randomly or emotionally, it speaks intentionally. Words are chosen carefully because faith understands the power of agreement. To declare that God goes ahead is to resist the temptation to speak doubt, fear, or negativity. It requires guarding the mouth as diligently as the heart. Complaints are replaced with confessions of trust. Speculation is replaced with expectation. Faith becomes a daily practice rather than a situational response. This faith also influences vision. When God is declared to be ahead, perspective changes. The future is no longer viewed as a threat, but as a territory already occupied by God. This reduces anxiety about what might happen. Fear thrives in uncertainty, but faith dismantles uncertainty by affirming God's presence in what has not yet occurred. The unknown becomes less intimidating because it is understood to be under divine supervision. Faith sees beyond immediate circumstances and anchors itself in eternal truth. Declaring that God goes ahead requires consistency. One declaration cannot sustain an entire life. It must be reaffirmed daily. Each morning presents new opportunities to choose faith over fear. This repetition is not weakness, it is discipline. Just as the body needs daily nourishment, the spirit needs daily alignment. Faith is strengthened through continual confession. The more consistently God is declared as the one who goes ahead, the more naturally trust becomes the default response to challenges. Faith that declares God goes ahead also impacts decision-making. Choices are no longer rushed or driven by pressure. There is an awareness that God's leadership precedes our movement. This encourages patience and discernment. Instead of forcing outcomes, faith waits for confirmation. Instead of reacting impulsively, faith seeks alignment. Declaring God's leadership creates space for listening. It slows the pace enough to recognize when a door is being opened or when restraint is required. This declaration of faith builds resilience. When setbacks occur, they do not immediately translate into discouragement. Faith interprets delay differently. It assumes that God is still ahead even when progress seems slow. This perspective prevents despair. It allows perseverance to grow without bitterness. Faith understands that not seeing immediate results does not mean God is absent. It trusts that preparation is happening beyond what is visible. Faith that declares God goes ahead also affects how we speak to ourselves. Internal dialogue shifts from self-criticism to trust. Instead of replaying fears and failures, the mind is trained to recall declarations of faith. This inner alignment is crucial because the loudest voice we hear is often our own. When faith shapes internal speech, confidence increases without arrogance. The soul becomes less susceptible to discouragement because it is constantly reminded of God's leadership. This faith creates a posture of expectancy rather than anxiety. Expectancy does not mean assuming everything will be easy. It means believing everything will be purposeful. Faith anticipates God's involvement in both success and struggle. It trusts that even challenges will serve a greater purpose. This mindset transforms how the day is experienced. Ordinary moments become opportunities for God to reveal His guidance. Unexpected encounters are viewed as divine appointments rather than inconveniences. Declaring that God goes ahead also strengthens obedience. When faith believes God is leading, obedience becomes less burdensome. We are more willing to follow instructions that do not make immediate sense because trust has already been established. Faith reduces the need for constant explanation. It accepts that understanding may come later. This willingness to obey without full clarity is a mark of mature faith. It demonstrates confidence in God's character rather than reliance on complete information. Faith that declares God goes ahead fosters humility. It acknowledges dependence on God without shame. It rejects the illusion of control and embraces partnership with God. This humility does not diminish confidence, it redirects it. Confidence is no longer rooted in personal ability but in divine faithfulness. This shift produces freedom. We are no longer pressured to perform perfectly. We are free to walk faithfully. Living with this kind of faith requires intentional resistance to fear. Fear will attempt to dominate thought patterns, especially when outcomes are uncertain. Faith responds by declaring truth, not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently. Each declaration reinforces trust. Each confession strengthens resolve. Faith does not deny reality. It reinterprets it through the lens of God's sovereignty. When faith declares God goes ahead, the heart is trained to look forward with hope rather than dread. The future is not something to survive, but something to step into with trust. Faith does not eliminate risk, but it eliminates panic. It allows movement without paralysis. It enables courage without recklessness. Faith becomes the lens through which every moment is viewed, shaping expectations, guiding responses, strengthening endurance, deepening trust. and anchoring the soul in the confidence that whatever lies ahead is already within the reach of the God who leads, prepares, protects, aligns, instructs, sustains, covers, orders, and remains faithful to those who declare his leadership before they ever take a step forward.